Have you ever had one of these psychedelic journeys where you had a big epiphany, a big realization, you remembered something that was really important and you're like, wow, this is incredible. Like, I'm never gonna forget this. And then you wake up the next day and maybe you already forget a bit about it, and then a week passes and it's out of your mind. You completely forgot about that insight, that epiphany, that huge realization that you had in the psychedelic journey. You know, you're not alone with this, because this is part of the human condition. It's that we forget, and that our job is to remember again. So in this video, I want to talk about the simple truth that all we gotta do is to remember. That's the whole gist of the spiritual journey and of psychedelic integration. And what I want to discuss in this video is, first of all, why we should look at remembrance, what it is, and how we can do it. I want to provide a couple simple steps that you can implement into your psychedelic integration journey to remember to remember. Alright, so why is this important? As you might have noticed, the human condition is about forgetting things. It's a key feature of our human mind. And actually, this forgetting, it's just part of who we are. Without it, we couldn't even live. With retaining all this information from this life, our mind would just completely explode. And if past lives come on top of that, it's just so much unnecessary junk. But the key feature of forgetting also counts towards our true nature, towards key attitudes that we want to embody, towards big realizations and big capital T truth that we have glimpsed at times in our psychedelic journeys. And then we fall into delusion again. There's also the metaphor of being asleep or being awake. Being in a state of being awake is basically just a moment of recognition, a moment of remembrance. And a consistent remembrance of that is enlightenment, is the liberation. And being asleep is basically just being in a state of forgetfulness, in a state of forgetting our true nature, truth, love, who we really are. And this has really a lot of different layers and levels to it. But it's interesting also to look at the etymology of the word to remember. It comes from re, meaning again, and memor, meaning mindful. Basically, to make mindful again. To make mindful again. That's our job. That's the whole gist of psychedelic integration. And actually, it's what psychedelics are doing, right? So let me tell you a story. When earlier this year, or last year I think it was, I was doing a week of 5-MeO-DMT. I started to work with low doses of 5-MeO-DMT and worked my way up to higher and higher doses. And throughout that week of working with this substance, I had these huge realizations. And these huge realizations were not me discovering something new that I didn't know before. But these huge realizations were a process of remembering. I was remembering very simple things that I already knew before, or that I already knew deep within my being, deep within my heart, but that I forgot. In this case in particular, it was about, letting go and surrendering. Basically taken to the extreme, letting go everything, letting go of control in my life and saying, here I am, divine presence, God, universe, life, truth, whatever you want to call it. I'm here and I fully surrender. I give myself fully. Please, you guide me. You work through me and let me open to you. Because I was controlling so much in my life. But I knew this truth before. I just forgot. And this week, again, made me remember that truth. That's a key feature of the psychedelics. In these epiphanies, we have we have the potential, the opportunity to remember. Sometimes it's a forced remembrance, sometimes it's a gentle unfolding, and sometimes we block ourselves off from that remembrance or from that insight that wants to break through, and then we feel a lot of resistance, which can lead to a lot of challenging experiences. But basically, when we look at through the lens of a spiritual practice with psychedelic work, what we're talking about a lot here on this channel of Psychedelic Actualization, it's about remembering what we already knew. Sometimes it's even just simple things, just like, I want to appreciate this cacao that I'm drinking with more presence. That's what it's about. And that process is, again, to make mindful again. But you know what happened after this week of 5-MeO-DMT? You're correct. I forgot. After a couple of weeks, after a couple of months again, I forgot this insight. And I had to remember again. And I had to, basically in my integration, set structures or kind of like find a way to remember again and again and again, to hold a constant remembrance in my mind, to be mindful all the time or as much as possible, right? That's the gist of psychedelic integration. It's not that we go in and then we remember and then we forget again, but no, we want to hold that remembrance, and we can in our daily life. There's a beautiful word, actually, it's in Greek. It's called aletheia, and I haven't looked too deeply into it. Just read a little bit about it, but it basically means truth. It's a word for truth in Greek, but truth in a very simple manner, in a different manner. It's a truth meaning an unforgetting or an unconcealment of truth. Because what are we remembering? In all these journeys of ours, in all our integration, what we are basically remembering is truth. And that's why I love aletheia, because it's a word for truth that means unforgetting. Because the truth is eternal. It's already there. It's accessible all the time. But when we forget, it's our job to not even remember. Remember is almost too active, but to unforget. And we see that in many different traditions as well, right? And Plato called the process of learning a process of recollection, of anamnesis, right? And many different traditions, also Jewish mystics and other spiritual traditions around the world, emphasize this point of remembrance. And the question might come to your mind, like, okay, good, I understood the importance of remembering, and I know that I need to remember my insights, I want to, but I can't, how can I remember, basically? So, and I just want to give you a couple of key points in which you can implement this insight of remembrance and how we can go about remembering truth in our day-to-day life. And it's a tricky one, because we're almost destined to forget again. And that's the first point, that's okay. There is a aspect of psychedelic integration that I find that has a lot to do with our attitude towards our integration, our own attitude towards the process of remembrance. And we can meet that process with compassion. We can meet ourselves with kindness in that process. We can implement maybe even a little bit of humor in that process, and responsibility and commitment. So we're committing ourselves to remember. We are taking responsibility to remember. And then when we can't, we meet ourselves with compassion. We meet ourselves with kindness. We meet ourselves with humor and say like, oh man, I forgot again. How funny, let me take a deep breath and remember again. And I guess the process of remembrance is depending on what you want to remember. It's different for everyone, and it's unique for everyone, and everybody is doing it in their own way. And I find that it's flexible, it's dynamic, because life is very dynamic, and my process of remembering is changing from phase to phase in my life. I'm not always doing the same kind of remembrance always. But there are a couple practices that we can implement. And usually it does come down to the very simple things for me. At least when we talk about remembrance of truth, and in the sense of self-realization and awakening, and these, just like far out, very deep, insightful, ecstatic experiences that we have in psychedelic space where we remember our true nature. I find it's meditation, it's reading, and it's journaling, and it's being out in nature. That's basically the whole gist of the simple remembrance. And how you want to put those into your life is something to experiment with, to find your own flow in, because there is the potential to set a structure in place, to say like, okay, in the morning, I'm going to do 20 minutes of breath awareness and just observe my breathing. And then in the evening, I'm going to do my writing and my journaling. And during the day, I'm going to write or read one passage of a spiritual scripture that really resonates with me. Because reading these words makes me remember. Because observing my breath and maybe doing some self-inquiry, asking who am I, makes me remember. Because asking myself questions and journaling about it, and journaling about how well I did today in the process of remembering, makes me remember again, makes me hold that importance of remembrance up in my mind. It makes me mindful again, right? I remember, I recognize, I set a structure into my day where I have conscious moments of recognition. There's even a simple practice by Nisargadatta Maharaj is really big on the I am meditation, and you can implement that even in your life throughout the day, and make it almost like a play to say, how often can I remember that I am throughout the day, and make it just a very short 2 to 5 second practice, and say like, when I get out of the car, I remember just to take a deep breath and let it all go for just 2 to 5 seconds. And automatically there is a remembrance of being arising, of truth being revealed, And that's the thing, that's the thing that I've noticed about the process of remembering. It's not something that we force. It's not something that we do, but we set the structure or the activities in place that allow the remembrance to happen. It's more like an inside out, it's something we open to, and then it happens and it unfolds naturally. And that's the second kind of like approach, is to flow more and have not too much of a rigid structure, because that can again kind of like put us in a box and put us in a routine where we read the scripture because it's on our to-do list, and not because we're excited about reading the scripture and having the potential recognition and realization of remembering truth. So it's a bit a balancing act between those, and to find a way that works for you, where you can basically implement a process of remembrance as much as you can into your day, as often as possible, and then it kind of like becomes second nature just to remember, and that's what the whole process of integration is about. Another way you can do the meditation is by singing, is by chanting, is by praying. There's so many different aspects and practices that we can implement to remember, basically. And being in nature, as I mentioned, is just a peak top one as well. And actually, the last one that I want to mention, the last key aspect, is the social aspect. I have found that through conversation, through talking to people, I can remember. as well. It depends sometimes on the person that I'm talking to. If there's a deep resonance and a deep spiritual understanding in the other as well, it's just majestic. You know, if it's even a spiritual mentor or a teacher or a coach, it's something that's very effective for me. If it's a friend that's on the same path, it's also very effective. But even with just strangers or just normal people that are not on the path, it's also very, very nourishing for me just to talk about these things. Because when I talk about these things, like even right now in this video, I'm talking to you, and by expressing what I feel, by talking about the nature of reality and the nature of truth and what I've experienced in psychedelic journeys, I automatically bring to mind again. I recognize, right? Basically bringing to mind again. I remember, I make mindful again the insights that I've had, that I've personally experienced through my personal experience, by expressing them, by communicating them, by sharing them. And the other can benefit as well from that. It's a beautiful reciprocity that's happening in conversation, and you can almost like talk each other into remembrance. And it's fun, you know, it's even fun to share that and have a moment of recognition and remembrance together. It's just wonderful. So yeah, that's basically it. And I want to invite you at this point as well, if you feel like there's nobody like that in your life, I do offer one-on-one coaching, which is basically just me being there for you in your process of remembrance, in your process of psychedelic integration, not just on the intellectual level, but actually taking what you have seen and putting it into action, putting the insight into transformation, and engaging in a conversation together to basically remember and be held accountable to remember, and not to forget to remember. That's what it's there for. The offering is there. There's a link in the video description. If you're interested, you can book a call with me and we can have a little chat. Otherwise, that was it. You know, well, basically conclusion of this video is everything is about just remembrance. Remembrance is not learning something new or recollecting facts or whatever facts of whatever, but it's about the remembrance of truth in the context of psychedelic actualization. And psychedelics are a beautiful way to make us remember forcefully sometimes big insights, and can give us this experiential reference point of how it feels to fully be in remembrance. And then our job afterwards is to set a structure in place or flow with practices and actions that allow us to open to this remembrance in a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. All right, that's it. Hope that was valuable, and see you in the next one. And if you're curious about a deeper dive into spiritual practices and psychedelics and how psychedelics can act and be utilized as a spiritual practice, you can watch this masterclass right here, which is a deep dive and the deepest dive into spirituality and psychedelics you will ever find. Well, probably not, but it's a deep presentation and highly valuable masterclass that I recommend to you.